So there are definitely risks, and you just have to know the limits of the technology and where it excels and where it doesn't, and how you can use it. And I think it's hard, but clearly there's some major use cases that can be very profoundly impactful for people and companies.
All right, Tom, welcome to the show.
So thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely, Tom. I'm very intrigued by your background. You writing a book in 19 about intro to AI and where we are today in 2023. I guess my first question to you is, tell me more about when you were writing that book. Did you ever think that this was going to be the world we live in 2023? Or was it more like 2027?
I got into computers when I was in high school, and I thought by college the world would be HAL 9000, Star Wars, and
Mhm.
cars flying, and it took a long time. Technology takes a long time. But when I wrote the book in 2019 called AI Basics, I was a more realistic person than I was when I was a teenager. I thought it would take a lot longer than it did.
Hmm.
But with Chat, and I look at the world before Chat GPT and the world after
Yeah,
Chat GPT, and it's taken, it surprised me, and I think it surprised just about everybody.
absolutely. So do you feel like it moved faster, I suppose, than the
The,
way that you had thought about the world rolling out AI?
yeah, clearly, it, there was definitely acceleration occurring when I wrote the book because of deep
Yeah.
learning, cloud computing. There were so many trends all at work. But then sometimes there's just in technology, there's an inflection. And we you could say we saw that with the iPhone, where it just which is so different, or the internet, the Netscape browser. There are these
Dial up.
yeah, exactly. Dial-up was although I used it a lot longer before because there was CompuServe and all these other things. Well, was probably one of those things that was pretty transforming for a lot of people, even though a lot of this technology had been around. And the same thing is with the Chat GPT technology. It's been around about 4 or 5 years, but it took a certain type of application to really make it real for the
I,
masses. And that's what's happening.
I love that. And out of curiosity, like what are you seeing in your world? Because you're obviously living and breathing AI more than the average person, the average entrepreneurs. And since ChatGPT's launch, there's millions of new apps popping up left and right, it seems. Tell us a little bit more about behind the scenes on what you're seeing.
There's a lot of scrambling. There's a lot of startups that thought the world was this way, and all of a sudden the world's this way. But to turn and to make those changes is very challenging, especially for some of these bigger companies that had these infrastructures in place.
Yep.
So what it means to me is that there's a huge opportunity for startups that they don't have a lot of that legacy to deal with. They can start from scratch and start from new ways of looking at things. So I think it takes a rethinking of how to code, for example. Even coding is different than what we thought before. But interacting with machines, interacting with systems is undergoing a major change because you can just tell it whatever you want.
Yeah.
Or you can provide an image or a PDF. You just give it a PDF and it'll figure it out. So I have a
I
tax
know.
question. I got this PDF from the IRS. I don't have time to read it, but maybe ChatGPT can figure it out for me. It's just these endless applications. And I think the other thing too is it's democratizing. You don't
Mhm.
have to know a programming language to get
Yep.
a lot of value out of this. You don't have to go take a course, a 3 month course, a year course, all these courses to figure out how to use this technology. So if you're a business, your employees can get up to speed on a lot of this a lot
Right.
faster than they could with some of these other technologies. So there's just a lot going on. When you say behind the scenes, there's a lot going on, definitely behind the scenes. And it's not necessarily the startups. It could just be a person at work trying something new and their job's just so much better and they got so much productivity out of it.
I know. It seems to me like every other post is a prompt. Here, have you tried this prompt? Have you done this? I'm like, what happened to my old LinkedIn feed? It's
That's
just
right.
not what it is anymore.
Yeah.
Which makes it's like I can't go anywhere where it's not the topic is not AI. Go ahead. I don't know if you want to
Well, yeah,
comment on that.
yeah. And I watch CNBC all day long. They should change
Yeah.
that channel to the AI channel
I
because
know.
that's all they talk about. NVIDIA has this dropping quarter,
Yep.
and it's just
Trillion
oh,
dollar valuation.
exactly. So there's definitely something real going on, and people are trying to figure it out. So Yeah, it is captured the imagination of everybody, and businesses, they have to get on board. This is something I don't think you can wait too long
I agree.
about.
I agree. So tell us about the new book that's coming out, Kyle.
Yeah, I had this idea last year for a book about generative AI. That's the topic of the new, and this was before Chat GPT when I had this idea because I saw what was happening. The investors like Sequoia and these major investors were investing in generative AI, and I saw companies like Jasper, Copy AI,
Yep.
uses GPT, at that time, GPT-3 to create content, to create a tweet, create blog posts. I just found it really intriguing. And I just thought if these big investors are moving into it aggressively, then there's probably something to it.
Right.
So I pitched it to my editor, and there's a little head scratching about my proposal because they didn't know quite what was going on, but they
Yep.
thought it's interesting. So we'll go ahead with it. And then ChatGPT came about.
Wow.
I had no idea. I had no idea. So the funny thing is, writing a book about technology is a bit challenging because it changes. Technology changes. But the thing
Yeah.
is, I started writing this book when I was GPT-3. And as I'm going heavy into the book, all of a sudden there's GPT-4. And then all of a sudden Microsoft's into it and with Bing, and then Google's doing it with Palm and Bard.
Right.
It was just like a fire hose and then I kept having to revise my chapters because things are moving so
Right.
fast.
It is.
But I think the thing is, I think it's kind of the point now where there's some stabilization because we know OpenAI is pretty much GPT-4 for a while. Google is Palm 2, Bard for a while. Microsoft is focused on the co-pilots in Azure and so forth. So I think we're at a point now where we have an idea where this is moving and where to place the bets. And as a company to have a little bit more confidence on what are the options available without having to, because you don't want to be a company and you start investing in something and then 2 weeks later something completely changes and you'd
Right.
rather go to another option and it's just expensive. So I think that it's getting clearer, and I think that's helped out with the book. So I think that the timing for the book should be pretty good.
Absolutely. In the book, I'm sure you talked about the downside of what are some drawbacks?
The headline, I was a panelist at a science fiction conference, the Nebula Award, and it was about AI and writers. And we had more questions than we could take. It was just overwhelming the question. And of course, these are science fiction writers. So they'd ask me questions about, was this the end of humanity and things like that? Totally, you would expect at a science fiction conference. But now I turn on CNBC and they're talking about the end of humanity. And they're not being laughed out of the room either. I turn on CNN or Fox or whatever, and they're talking about the end of the world. And they're not laughing, or they're doing it with a straight face
Right.
and all serious. That would not have been the topic of conversation a year ago. Clearly, you'd have been laughed. You'd just been laughed at. You just, not taken seriously at all. So
Wow.
I think in terms of, the downsides, I do think that there are some existential risks, although I think
Right.
it's, yeah, still very much down the road. Now, I've been proven wrong about this because I didn't know ChatGPT would come around. So the technology is moving fast, but I don't think that the existential risk is something we have to necessarily worry about right now. But I do think there are other risks. And I think part of it is we don't know. This is a black box. We know it creates this great content and it seems intelligent. We're not too sure why. And if you're not too
Right.
sure why, it's hard to rely on it. And it does have these hallucinations where it'll say something and it's convinced it's correct and it's not correct. And then you tell ChatGPT, do it again, but explain your answer. And it comes out with the right answer because it went through their process.
Wow.
So it's a little temperamental, and it just depends on the use case as well. If I'm a marketer, how you want to be creative. And creativity means you might stretch things a little bit. Or if I'm a writer,
Right.
science fiction writer, if it makes things up, that's awesome. That's actually what I'm looking for. But if I'm creating an airline manual, yeah, I probably want to make sure it's correct and absolutely perfect and there's no problems with it. So it depends on the use case right now. So there are definitely risks, and you just have to know the limits of the technology and where it excels and where it doesn't and how you can use it. And I think it's hard, but clearly there's some major use cases that could be very profoundly impactful for people and companies.
Absolutely. Are you following like the Adobe's Firefly and how they're using AI? Tell us a little bit more about what's happening there.
Yeah. So I was actually at the Adobe conference a few months ago.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. So I saw the keynote, and it's still early, very early. But I do like how they're taking a more responsible approach to it because
Mhm.
they're a community of creators and you don't want to, I think there's fear that, and the writer strike is an example of this, where people feel like, are they just going to steal essentially our training data and replace us? Not even pay us for the training data that we've been creating because it's,
Forever.
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Like
Exactly.
Barron's.
Yeah, totally. Although it's behind a
Yeah.
firewall, so there's some protection there. But the fact is that this is content that has been created by humans, and these machines are using that to create new content. And so there's a lot of legal cases going on. But I think what Adobe, I think, took the responsible position, said, we're going to figure out how to compensate creators, not to replace them. These are going to be tools to enhance and augment their capabilities because there's still so many things that we humans can do that these machines cannot. And I think that
Mhm.
approach is great for Adobe. I think Adobe also by partnering, knowing where they're strong and knowing where they should partner, I think is important. So they partner with OpenAI and Microsoft, these companies to help make a better product. So I think for marketers and designers, I think Firefly is a great product to take a look at. Although I think it's still beta,
Correct. I was
but
gonna
it is
say,
on the right track.
yeah, the
Go ahead, sir.
marketing world, they were like, we still need somebody to design the flyer. We need somebody to design the brochure, but I think it's coming. I don't
Yeah.
think we're going to need to wait too long. The way the Firefly is going, it'll take
Yeah.
the copy and then it'll design you something beautiful. That's going to be changing our space a lot while I'm in marketing.
Yeah, and I think it democratizes it or makes it, for example, there's certain use cases where, for example, I'm not, yeah, I might want to design something, but I'm not going to spend $10,000 for a designer.
Right.
There's no reason for me to do that. So I'm not
Mhm.
replacing anybody if I use one of
Right.
these things. I'm just using a tool. But if I'm a really good designer, I could make so many different prototypes and I could have more clients and I can
Right.
focus on those things where, because, you know, with these like Dali and so forth, they do create some really compelling immersive images, but sometimes it'll have three legs or two heads or it's
Six
not quite
fingers.
exactly.
Yeah.
The lettering is off. And so you still need people to go in there and I think for game design, and I think there's so many things that for great designers, these tools are going to be life changing to them. And it's going to make it
Right.
so it'll increase their productivity and make it so they can do more than they're doing today. So I think it's positive overall.
My last question, Thomas, education, kids, college. How do you think that's going to transform knowing what you know?
Yeah. So the first business I started was in online education in the early 90s.
I
And,
read that.
and so this is an area that I've been involved in for quite some time. And I'm a big believer, very bullish on technology and education. And I think things like Chat GPT are, we've seen the cheating that's happened the first use case
Right.
of Chat GPT. I probably would have done the same thing when I was in grade school if I had a tool like that. But I can't blame them too much for that. But I would say that aside from the cheating, that there are some really great use cases here. Duolingo,
Huh?
which is one of the largest, if not the largest language app in the world, is one of the
Right.
first companies to partner with OpenAI. And they've created
Mhm.
some new apps that create these really immersive experiences where you can chat with your virtual assistant in a certain language, but it'll also, as you're talking to that virtual agent, you're learning about the language and, you should have said, I could have said it this way, or actually this is the way to say it in this situation. And then they have these cafe where you can interact in a cafe and things like that. But it's all revolves around this generative AI. So I think for learning, for kids to learn or adults to learn, in fact, I think corporate training could be revolutionized.
Right.
Creating specific training videos, very time consuming, very difficult to do. But you can clone voices, you can get these images, and you could do that and put together training materials a lot quicker. So I think from grade school to college to corporate, generative AI is going to have a big impact. Now it's going to take time. It's
Will
like
the,
you got to think things a little differently, but it'll take time.
will there even be college?
Even before this AI revolution, I think that was a big question because there's so many different options for students to take to learn. And I do think corporations are realizing that they need to play a role in reskilling and upskilling for
Right.
the types of things that need to be done in the future. Yeah, I think for probably a growing number of people, college may not be the best option for them.
Right.
And maybe the AI could accelerate that because there's so many, this could take education to a whole new level where you have your
Mhm.
personal tutor who's there 24/7, doesn't cost a lot of money to use, and
Yeah,
seems to know about everything. And in any language you have to speak in.
that's true.
And if you're blind, it could talk to you.
No,
It could use the voice. It's truly remarkable. And I do think education is just one of the areas that's going to be profoundly changed.
I don't know if you saw that interview with Elon. I've heard of OpenAI, like you said, 4 or 5 years
Mhm.
because Elon used to talk about it.
Yeah.
And he wanted to be an open source business. Did you see that where it's not open source and it's for profit? What do
Yeah.
you can tell us more about that and your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So I do cover some of the history of OpenAI in my book. But yeah, it did start off as a nonprofit organization. And the vision was to democratize AI. So anyone can
Yeah.
have the ability. The other vision is to create AI that is human level AI or superhuman level. That's the ultimate vision of OpenAI. And Elon and Sam Altman and Reid
Right.
Hoffman, there's a kind of a who's who of Silicon Valley involved in the early days of this company. And that's their vision. They did not want Google or Microsoft to dominate this business. Now, Elon's, you got to take whatever he says, it changes. It's a moving target. But I think part of his departure from OpenAI probably had
Yeah.
a lot to do with Tesla and what they were doing at
Mm.
Tesla and conflicts where he's pursuing.
Conflict of AI.
Ye-
Yeah, because he's got his own AI team and his own AI, and then these guys do. But I'm wondering more of when did they switch from a
Oh,
open source name that Elon gave to this closed source, then
yeah,
charge for it and keep the
right.
money.
They still have some open source Whisper, which is the voice
Right.
speech. It's primarily proprietary and based on APIs. That change occurred in 2019. And the main reason was building these models is just insanely expensive. Elon does have a lot of money, but I don't know if he's going to shell out $10 billion. But
Mm,
Microsoft can shell out $10 billion. So they almost had no choice but to go with a huge partner like Microsoft. Now, Microsoft was very pioneering because that was a big risk. That's just a small company, it's still a small company. And there was
mm,
no guarantee that any of this would work out. And yet they were willing to invest billions and billions of dollars in the startup for their play on AI. But that's, there's some, it's not a, it's not a typical corporation that they created. It's called a capped company. So the profits are
sure.
capped,
Got
but it's still a profit
driven.
focused company.
Right.
Yeah. And Microsoft obviously is very focused on profits. They're like one of those profitable companies on the face of the earth. But it's 2019 that transition occurred. And if it did not happen, we would not have Chat GPT today.
Got it.
Yeah, it's just too expensive to run these systems.
Got it. Yeah. I remember the open source thing because Elon's always trying to give away things.
Yeah.
And I saw the interview. I was like, hi, I remember that, but then I forgot that it was a 501(c)(3). And then I'm like, yeah, what happened? So thanks for
Yeah,
clearing that up for me.
sure.
Where can our audience find you, Tom?
Yeah. So I do have a website, TOMTAULI.com. There's a contact form there if you want to contact me. I'm also on Twitter, another Elon company. I'm at TAULI.
Yeah,
You can contact me there as well. And they have a link. There are links there to my books, and but it's pretty easy. Those are the two best ways to contact me.
absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks very much. It's great, great conversation.
Absolutely.